You'll never be successful like him. My girlfriend said that while we were driving home from a friend's engagement party. I looked out the passenger window for a second, then I nodded. Okay. 10 weeks later, she was standing outside my townhouse asking why I had stopped trying to impress her. The answer was simple, because eventually I realized I wasn't failing her expectations. I was surviving them. My name is Ethan. I'm 35 years old. I work as a project manager for a construction company. I've never been rich, never owned a sports car, never posted photos from luxury resorts, but I paid my bills, owned my home, had money in savings, and slept well at night. For most people, that would have been enough. For my girlfriend, Lauren, it slowly stopped being enough. When we first met, she wasn't like that, or at least not obviously. She was smart, funny, driven. One of the reasons I liked her was because she had goals, real goals, not fantasy goals. She wanted a good career, a stable life, a family someday. The things she talked about felt realistic, healthy, but somewhere during our second year together, something changed, or maybe something revealed itself. It's hard to tell the difference. The first red flag was comparison, constant comparison. Lauren compared everything: restaurants, vacations, apartments, jobs, cars, people, especially people. One evening we'd be perfectly happy. The next she'd see a coworker post photos from some expensive vacation, and suddenly our plans weren't exciting enough. At first I thought it was harmless. Everyone compares sometimes. The problem was that she never seemed finished comparing. There was always someone doing better, making more, owning more, traveling more. The second red flag arrived through her best friend, Melissa. Melissa was the kind of person who measured success entirely through appearances. Designer bags, luxury apartments, expensive dinners, everything had to look impressive. Every time Lauren spent a weekend with Melissa, she'd come home dissatisfied. Not angry, dissatisfied. Like she'd spent 48 hours being reminded that somebody else had something bigger. One Friday night, we had dinner with Melissa and her boyfriend. Halfway through the meal, Melissa started talking about a guy she'd dated years earlier. Apparently he'd sold a startup, made millions, retired early. The story lasted 20 minutes. By the end, Lauren seemed more interested in that guy than the actual people sitting at the table. On the drive home, she said, "Some people really know how to take risks." I glanced over. "Yeah." Then came the follow-up. "Not everybody is built for that." I knew what she meant, pretended I didn't. That became a habit. The third red flag appeared when I turned down a promotion. It would have doubled my travel schedule, increased my stress, and probably added another 25% to my income. A lot of people would have taken it. I didn't, because I genuinely liked my life. I liked seeing my family, having weekends, having balance. When I told Lauren, she stared at me like I'd made a terrible mistake. "You turned it down?" "Yeah." "Why?" I explained. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't listening. She wasn't hearing my reasons. She was calculating the salary. The following weeks became exhausting. The promotion kept coming back. Every disagreement somehow returned to it. Every conversation about the future somehow returned to ambition. Not our future, my ambition, or what she believed was missing. Eventually, she started making little comments. Nothing dramatic, just enough to sting. One night we were looking at houses online, purely for fun, something couples do. Lauren found a huge property outside the city, massive backyard, luxury kitchen, the works. Then she laughed. "We'd need a different income bracket for that." I smiled. "Probably," she smiled back, then said, "At least one of us would." The comment landed harder than she realized, or maybe exactly as hard as she intended. I let it go, like I always did, because every relationship has rough periods. That's what I kept telling myself. The next warning sign came during a barbecue at her parents' house. Lauren's mother had always been polite to me, friendly, supportive, but recently she'd started sounding a lot like Melissa, a lot like Lauren. At one point she asked about my career, then casually mentioned someone her friend's daughter was dating, a surgeon. Apparently he owned 2 houses, 3 rental properties, and a boat. I listened politely, then looked over at Lauren. She wasn't uncomfortable. She wasn't embarrassed. She was nodding, agreeing. Like this conversation made perfect sense. That bothered me more than the comments themselves, because criticism is one thing, validation is another. By then I knew something was changing, not in me, in the relationship. I just hadn't figured out what. Then came the engagement party. The night everything shifted. One of Lauren's college friends had gotten engaged. The fiancé owned a successful consulting business. Big house, luxury car, the whole package. Throughout the evening people kept talking about him, his success, his money, his future. Every conversation felt identical. By the end of the night, I couldn't wait to leave. Halfway home, Lauren broke the silence. "You know what I admire about him?" I shrugged. "What?" "He refuses to settle." I nodded, then looked back at the road. A few seconds passed. Then she delivered the sentence that changed everything, the sentence that became the title of this story. She looked directly at me and said, "Honestly, Ethan, you'll never be successful like him." The car suddenly felt very quiet. And for the first time in our relationship, I stopped making excuses for her. For a few seconds after Lauren said it, neither of us spoke. The road stretched ahead, streetlights passed by, and all I could think about was one sentence. "You'll never be successful like him." Not because it hurt, because it explained everything. The comparisons, the comments, the disappointment, the promotion arguments. For months I'd been trying to understand why nothing ever seemed good enough. Now I knew I wasn't competing against reality. I was competing against an idea, an image, a fantasy version of success that constantly moved further away. Eventually I asked, "That's how you see me?" Lauren sighed immediately, the same sigh I'd heard dozens of times before. "Oh my God. What? You're taking it personally." I almost laughed, because I wasn't sure how someone was supposed to take it. We drove the rest of the way home mostly in silence, and for the first time in a very long time, I stopped trying to explain my side, not because I agreed. Because I was tired, really tired. The next morning, Lauren acted like nothing had happened. No apology, no explanation, nothing, just normal conversation, coffee, breakfast, weekend plans. As if she hadn't spent the previous night comparing me to another man. That bothered me more than the comment itself, because it told me something important. She genuinely didn't think she'd crossed a line. Over the following weeks, the comparisons increased, not dramatically, gradually, the way most unhealthy patterns develop. One evening, she showed me a social media post from a former classmate. The guy had just purchased a vacation home. Lauren stared at the pictures, then shook her head. "Some people really figure life out." I nodded. "Looks nice." Then she looked directly at me. "Don't you ever wish you wanted more?" There it was again, the implication, the suggestion that contentment was somehow a flaw. The strange thing was that I did want more. I just wanted different things. Peace, balance, time, relationships, things that didn't fit neatly into salary comparisons. But every time I explained that, Lauren looked at me like I was speaking another language. Around that same time, Melissa became even more involved, which was never a good sign. One Saturday afternoon, Lauren came home from brunch with her looking irritated, not at me, at life, at circumstances, at everything. Eventually, she sat on the couch and said, "Melissa thinks we're wasting time." I looked up from my book. "We," she nodded. "Us." I waited. Then came the rest. "She thinks we're too comfortable." The funny thing, Melissa wasn't in our relationship, yet somehow her opinions carried more weight than mine. That realization stayed with me, because it wasn't really about Melissa. It was about influence. Lauren was slowly outsourcing her happiness to people who didn't have to live with the consequences. A few days later, another clue appeared. This one came from Lauren's mother. Again. We were having dinner together when she casually brought up the engagement party. Then she started praising the fiancé, his investments, his business, his future plans. Eventually, she smiled and said, "Lauren has always dreamed big." The comment itself wasn't a problem. The look Lauren gave me afterward was, because it wasn't agreement, it was expectation, like she wanted me to feel inadequate, like she wanted me to hear the comparison. And honestly, I did, for the first time. I really did. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was angry, because I was finally being honest with myself. The issue wasn't success. The issue wasn't money. The issue wasn't ambition. The issue was respect. Someone who respects you doesn't constantly measure you against other people. Someone who respects you doesn't treat your accomplishments as placeholders. Someone who respects you doesn't make you feel like you're always interviewing for a position you already hold. That realization changed something. The following weekend, I tried one last conversation, not an argument, a conversation, calm, direct. Respectful, I explained how the comparisons felt, how dismissive some of the comments had become, how exhausting it was to constantly feel evaluated. Lauren listened quietly, at first. Then came the familiar pattern, defensiveness, immediately. I'm just being honest, I nodded. Okay, you want me to lie? No. Then what's the problem? The problem was that honesty without consideration becomes cruelty, but I knew saying that wouldn't help. Because this conversation wasn't really about understanding, it was about defending, and she was already doing that. For nearly an hour we went in circles. Every concern became insecurity, every example became overreaction. Every feeling became evidence that I was the problem. Eventually, Lauren leaned back and crossed her arms. The gesture felt familiar, like she'd already decided how the conversation would end. Then she said something that changed everything. Something much worse than the original comparison. You know what your problem is? I stayed quiet. You're comfortable being average. The room became silent, not because the comment shocked me, because it confirmed what I'd already started realizing. Nothing I did would ever be enough, because enough wasn't the point. The comparison was the point. A week later, another shift happened. Not in Lauren, in me. I stopped defending my choices. Stopped explaining my career decisions. Stopped trying to prove my worth. And strangely enough, I felt lighter. The less I chased approval, the less power her criticism had. Lauren noticed almost immediately. One evening she asked, "Why are you being distant?" I looked up. Distant? Yeah, I shrugged. I've just been busy. The irony was impossible to miss. For months she'd been emotionally unavailable. Now she didn't like experiencing it herself. Then came the conversation that ended everything, at least emotionally. We were sitting in the living room after dinner, neither of us talking much. The atmosphere felt different, like something had already broken. Eventually, Lauren sighed, then delivered the sentence she'd probably been moving toward for months. "If you're happy settling for less, maybe we're just not compatible." The room went completely quiet. 6 months earlier, I would have argued, explained, defended myself, tried to prove my value. This time, I simply nodded, then said, "Okay." And for the first time since the comparisons began, Lauren looked genuinely afraid. When I said, "Okay," Lauren looked completely blindsided. Not angry, not offended, confused, like she'd expected me to fight. For nearly 2 years, every major disagreement had ended the same way. She criticized, I explained. She compared, I defended. She pulled away, I moved closer. The pattern was predictable, comfortably predictable, for her. This time the pattern broke. "What do you mean, okay?" I looked at her calmly. "If that's how you feel." She stared at me. "That's it," I nodded. "Yeah." The silence that followed lasted almost 20 seconds, and for the first time in our relationship, Lauren didn't seem confident. The conversation ended shortly afterward. Neither of us raised our voices. Neither of us slammed doors. Nothing dramatic happened, but deep down something had changed, because the moment I stopped trying to prove myself, the entire relationship shifted. The following week felt strange. Lauren suddenly became interested in conversations she'd ignored for months. She texted more, called more, asked more questions. Questions she'd once treated as unnecessary. One afternoon she texted, "What are you doing tonight?" I replied, "Dinner with my brother." A minute later another message arrived. "Where, then? How late, then? Who else is going?" I stared at my phone, not because the questions bothered me, because they sounded familiar, very familiar. For months I'd been told questions were controlling. Now she wanted answers. The difference? I wasn't upset. I simply responded politely. Then went back to my evening. That seemed to frustrate her because she wasn't looking for information. She was looking for reassurance, the same reassurance she'd spent months refusing to give. A few days later came Karma Wave 1, the practical consequence. Lauren had been assuming we'd move in together the following year, not officially. But everyone knew it was coming. Friends knew, family knew, we knew, or at least she thought we did. One Saturday afternoon she brought it up. "What are we doing about housing next year?" I looked up from my coffee. "What do you mean?" "Our place." There was a pause, then I answered honestly, "I don't think that's happening." The color immediately drained from her face. "What?" "I don't think we should move in together." For the first time, consequences entered the conversation, not emotions. Consequences, real ones, the kind you can't explain away, the kind you can't blame on insecurity, the kind that force reality into the room. Lauren stared at me, like she genuinely couldn't believe what she was hearing. Because deep down she never expected me to leave. She expected me to improve, compete harder, earn more, prove myself. But leave, that possibility had never occurred to her. A few days later she called me, twice, then 3 times, then 5. Eventually I answered. She sounded upset, not angry, scared. "I don't understand." I listened quietly, then said, "I think you do." And honestly, I believed that, because people usually know when they've crossed a line. They just don't expect consequences. Then came Karma Wave 2, the social fallout. And like most real social fallout, it happened naturally. Not because I exposed Lauren, because people pay attention. Mutual friends noticed something was wrong. Plans stopped being made. Events stopped including both of us. Questions started appearing. Eventually, the truth surfaced. Not the dramatic version, the real version. The version where Lauren spent months comparing her boyfriend to wealthier men. The version where every achievement became inadequate. The version where appreciation slowly disappeared. The most surprising part, people didn't take her side. Not even Melissa, at least not completely. Apparently, it's easy to encourage unrealistic expectations until those expectations destroy a perfectly functional relationship. Then suddenly, everyone becomes a relationship expert. One evening, my friend Marcus called. "You hear what happened?" "No." "Lauren and Melissa got into an argument." That surprised me. They agreed on almost everything. "What about?" Marcus laughed. "Melissa told her she pushed too hard." I sat quietly for a moment, because that sentence captured everything. Not too hard for success, too hard on the relationship, too hard on the comparisons, too hard on the criticism. Eventually, even Melissa could see it. Then came Karma Wave 3, the emotional consequence, the hardest one. About 6 weeks later, Lauren asked if we could meet. I agreed. We met at a small coffee shop we'd visited dozens of times during our relationship. The moment she sat down, I noticed something different. No superiority, no disappointment, no criticism, just sadness. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she finally asked, "Did you ever feel like nothing you did was enough?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was difficult, because it was honest. I thought about it for a second, then nodded. "Yeah." The tears appeared immediately, not dramatic tears, not manipulative tears. The kind people cry when they finally stop arguing with reality. For nearly an hour we talked, honestly. More honestly than we had in months, maybe years. Eventually, Lauren admitted something, not about me, about herself. She'd become obsessed with measuring her life through other people, other people's houses, other people's vacations, other people's salaries, other people's relationships, and somewhere along the way she stopped appreciating her own. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I thought you'd always keep trying." There it was, the truth. The same truth that destroys a lot of relationships. She thought my patience was permanent. My loyalty was guaranteed. My presence was automatic. And eventually that certainty made her careless. Because people stop protecting things they believe they can't lose. A month later, we officially ended things. Quietly, respectfully, no screaming, no revenge, no dramatic confrontation, just acceptance. The relationship had already ended long before we admitted it. We were simply acknowledging reality. The following year became one of the best years of my adult life, not because I became rich, not because I suddenly became successful, because I finally stopped measuring myself through someone else's expectations. I focused on work, accepted new opportunities, spent more time with family, traveled, built stronger friendships. Most importantly, I found peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't depend on proving anything. Almost a year later, I ran into Lauren unexpectedly. We talked for a few minutes, nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. Before leaving, she smiled sadly and said, "You know what I realized?" "What?" She looked down at her coffee. "I spent so much time chasing someone better." I waited. Then she laughed softly. "I never stopped to appreciate someone good." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then we wished each other well and went our separate ways. And as I walked away, I realized something. The relationship didn't end because Lauren compared me to another man. It didn't end because of one comment, or one argument, or one bad night. It ended because of hundreds of small choices, hundreds of moments where comparison replaced appreciation, hundreds of times respect became conditional. That sentence didn't destroy the relationship. It simply exposed a problem that had been growing for a very long time. And once I finally saw it clearly, I stopped chasing. That's when everything changed.